Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. The Fat Lad Neil Pickup here with your Supernatural Strength channel. And it is episode number 3 of R.V.J. and Expose. We're talking to Rob Vigeant Jr. Rob, back again, mate. Back again. How you doing, mate? You all right?
Doing good. Days rolling by and ready to have at it. Sometimes just talking to someone outside my kids is enough to keep the sanity.
Well, that's it. You got to do something these days, mate. It's crazy, crazy times. And we've had very positive feedback from the first 2 episodes. Guys, just a point on that. If you haven't seen episode 1 or episode 2 of this series with Rob, then please check them out. I'll put the links in the description. Go check those out. And remember, before we start, if you do like what we're doing here, please give us a lift. Hit that subscribe button, like, share, let people know about this thing. We're just starting. I haven't really got a clue what we're doing. But, you know, it's good to get things going. So we'll get straight into the action with Rob again. And we'll pick up where we were, mate. You obviously, at the end of the last episode, had just started to get to the situation where your career was starting to take some real direction in arm wrestling. And by that, I mean that you'd started to understand technical benefit. You spoke to us about Engin Terzi, the Enigma of Rage. For those of you who don't know Engin, one of the very best, if not the very best, lightweight arm wrestler in the history of the sport. Certainly he's in that conversation without a shadow of a doubt. And, well, over to you, mate. I mean, how did you come across Engin?
Yeah, at that point in time, you're talking, so 14 or 15 years ago, I went to my first tournament in 2004, and I really didn't do much after it in the 2004 season. I started competing again in like 2005. But this wasn't, you know, like I said, there was no practices. I wasn't attending any trainings. It just, I went to a tournament, and then I started going to more tournaments. But then as I got involved, I found a training group in New Hampshire. And stylistically, I'd say a lot of those guys pulled kind of like Patton. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a little more finger climb, Jim Fitzsimmons type stuff. Yep. And for me, I felt like it took a lot of my natural, like, hand strength and cup out of it. So I was just... the Northeast board was raging back then. That's where all the video was. And they started sharing videos of old tournaments. And maybe YouTube was just getting started. I'm not sure. But there was an archive of videos. And I just looked for guys that impressed me via their hand strength and hand control, guys that were known for it. So obviously John Brzenk, Ron Bath, and Engin Terzi. And I remember I saw a lot of things because back then Engin was posting a lot, did a lot of his videos. And I watched and I listened to his theory and methodology on how he would close his hand and what he would do. So little snippets I had, I would just kind of like replay them and try to watch how he sets up. And he was very good at putting it into words when he said like how he would set up. His hand would feel like a roof and kind of even everything from like his lat to his arm. And all I tried to do was just monkey see, monkey do. I didn't have a one-on-one. I just tried to take my own spin on it and use it. And whether it was right or wrong, it did give me a boost of success with guys that I previously wasn't as good with.
Mm-hmm. So, now, when you obviously probably pound for pound got better physical weaponry than Engin has. And Engin at that time, this is the interesting thing, Engin at that time was borderline bantamweight, really. I mean, I know he's progressed up through the classes, but we're talking about a man who started 60 kilograms in weight, 55 kilograms in weight, and progressed up. To the man we see now, walks around at probably 80, 85 kilograms, but he's in his 40s. The peak of his career was anywhere between 65 kilograms and 75 kilograms. And yet we saw him, and I've seen him up to recently, dominating and beating much bigger opponents.
Right.
You know, he transcend weight classes. Was that something that appealed to you then? Were you sort of thinking, or was it purely and simply a technical observation?
100%. Seeing somebody, anytime you see somebody that sits so head and shoulders above a class and then can be that exception to the rule that the bigger man is the better man. You know, I've watched him, Denny Dubray, the guy there, Andreas Rundstrom.
Yeah,
Gashevsky back when Rustam was coming along. But the guys who, you know, even Dave Patton, what I could find on them. I love the guys that proved that I always had the theory that weight will make a difference in arm wrestling depending on, it's not a rule of thumb. It's depending on how the person's built, where the weight is distributed, their skeleton and stuff like that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So him appealing to me, yeah, I just liked his overall swagger on the table. I liked his approach. A lot of the things that he explained and how he pulled, I feel like it made sense to me. But I never was 100% proficient at applying it, because as you walk the life, we talked about in the last episode, as you start getting dominant, it's hard to repeat those motions with training partners who get frustrated training with you.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to, when you get injured, you start pulling differently because you compensate for injuries. So what was used to be, you know, solid and, you know, all go and fluid, you lose some of it because now you start getting outside your arm and shoulder. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever know if I ever got it even close to proficient at it, but his appeal to me was basically everything he preached and what he stood for at the time and
Mm-hmm.
to this day made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And when you looked at that style, Rob, when you sort of broke it down, did you find that it changed? Were you sort of going against your natural instincts as an arm wrestler? Because I know in the past you'd spoken about when you pulled, I think it was episode 1, you said that one of your first experiences, you pulled an established arm wrestler who was trying to top roll you. You ended up just a basic raw novice. You cupped him, you rolled him, you smashed him in a hook and dominated him. Engin, very much hand and wrist, very much pronation-based technical puller. Did you find that you were sort of, at that stage when you started emulating Engin, were you going outside of your natural lane? Did it feel weird to you, or did it feel like, oh, a light's gone on and it feels better than it?
It wasn't so much, because then when I was at that point in time, I was going to a training group that was just heavy post focused. And I've always, just even when I did the grip strength, I had, you know, strong hammer game, hammer rotation, everything that was out there for a feat of strength I used to play with and do with hands and wrists. So usually if you see somebody that's a dedicated hooker, not always, but a lot of the time, it's because they're getting in there because they're trying to compensate from being taken in directions they don't like. I just feel like I fell in places because of lack of application and lack of education. It wasn't that physically my body wasn't up to snuff doing it. So I was doing a lot of posting, but I found myself kind of like leaving my arm behind and being in a weird lane that was vulnerable. So with Engin, all I had to do was just fine tune with just standing a little taller. Instead of being like all knuckles up where I didn't have control, I just dropped my hand a little bit and was really controlling. The rolling and the rotation was kind of natural for me. So it was literally like a fine tune. It was like taking a car that you can't figure out what the gremlin is in it and bringing it to a place and having them put a programmer on it. And all of a sudden the same car that was sputtering, spitting, same motor, same mechanics, now it's shooting 100 extra horsepower and running mint.
So you spoke about the fact that you went through and you started cutting through guys that had given you problems in your early days. Once you sort of got into your stride, or was it at that time you feel like you did get into your stride, or were you still a bit clunky then? Were you still taking losses to upper echelon guys?
Well,
where did you see yourself?
The truth of the matter is, right out of the gates, I was winning. You know, I was at that national level from day one. I went to a tournament, and, you know, I took seconds to James Smith in like 2 or 3 different nationals. But you're talking a year deep, I was beating guys like Jacob Abbott in a hook.
Which is mega.
Yeah, in a hook, when everybody told me it was suicide. And
again,
then,
for those people out there who don't know Jacob, Washington area-based guy, rock strong, very experienced, and Jacob's an extremely underrated arm wrestler. Jacob Abbott, very, very, very proficient puller, both arms, right back from the sort of mid to late 90s. You don't hear a great deal about him these days, you know, but just a salt-of-the-earth guy as well. Lovely dude.
The first time I saw him was on that when they did that Chehalis Superstar Showdown in 2004. And I believe it was, you know, John Brzezinski was there, Jacob Abbott, Luke Reimer, Marcio, Devin, you know, some Glenn Houghton, people that you don't hear about as much, you know, a lot of great pullers. And
very much Devon's coming out party for a lot of people, that as well. A lot of people, that's one of the things that put him on a lot of people's radar.
Yeah, I believe he was in the finals.
With John White.
Marcio beat him that day, but Marcio fouled out at one of them. Marcio looked great that day, and then he went in the finals with John. But I think John's the one who inevitably won that. but they had a nice little hook match at the end, and a lot
Yep.
of people. It was a great class. But yeah, so a year deep, I was, pulling guys like that. I was, beating a lot of the guys that I saw on ESPN when I first started the sport, and I was always in the top 2 or 3, no matter what the bracket was. So my stride was more or less just winning easier or being able to compete and beat those guys that were just the 1 or 2 over me. So, and then it was a constant evolution depending on what was going on in my life. If I was able to train, where I was able to train, injuries, when you're a kid, you think you're bulletproof, you can never get hurt. Even still, I still do it. I'm almost 40 years old. And when I did that stupid curl video the other day, I didn't go down there. I wasn't snorting pre-workout. I wasn't blasting Metallica. I didn't do 10 warm-up sets. I saw a curl video at work. I came home in my work boots, in my thing, loaded up the bar with whatever 10 pounds was over the max at the time, and just did it my first rep. Could I have popped a bicep? Probably. I've been terrible at stretching, warming up.
With 80 kilos on the bar, you bet your ass you could.
Yeah, pretty, but that's how I've gotten hurt in the past. But you do these things, and then you get these injuries, and little do you know that by the time you get educated, it's already too late. You're already knee deep in an injury. So, if I did things different, I probably could have had a much different run. But yeah, that was a start of a stride for me with becoming from a guy who's good in my area to some people there was a more recognition on a nationwide basis because I was going to those tournaments. I was going to all the nationals. I was going to Arnold's, back when those tournaments there was no league. So Arnold's was like an elite event. USA, all the nationals really would get the big players. You'd get Todd Hutchins, you'd get Chad Silvers, you'd see Craig Toulier and Chris Chandler and Michael Todd and pretty much everybody. The first nationals I went to, everybody who was a name was in that building.
I'm trying to remember the first time I pulled with you. I think it was on the practice table at ROTN, I think, when we were pissing around. And you'd pulled a tournament. I had MC'd. And we're messing around You were actually quite drunk as well.
No.
I don't want to drop it on people, but
yeah, I got
quite
you.
drunk. But I remember we were talking back at the hotel afterwards, and that was the first night I remember thinking, you're cut from a different cloth because you had a lot of just unpolished strength, a lot of you're really, really strong in a lot of areas. And I remember thinking, yeah, he's solid. And I started talking to a couple of the lads later that evening, and I said, Rob's got some, hasn't he? And John Brasink picked me up on it and said, oh, yeah, he's got massive potential, mate. Really, really, And when I've spoken to you since then, my sort of opinion of you is that you'd not really ever focused hard. You're a little bit like Herman Stevens in some ways, that you got more potential probably than you're given credit for. And also people, because of your achievements in the career you've had, which has been highs, lows, ons, offs, distractions, focus, whatever it may be, and a combination of all those, I don't think you've ever really encapsulated yourself in the sport at any stage to the level where a lot of people have, you know what I mean, who've achieved less, and yet they've really folded themselves up in it. I wanted to sort of understand, in those early days, do you feel like you were very, very obsessed by it? Very focused on it? Or do you feel you've never really been in that lane? At what point did you, if you ever have, feel like you were very focused on it? Or has it just been sporadic?
Well, to be honest, I've had, since I've been competing in sport 15 years, I've had what you'd call a very checkered life, where life has had a lot of highs and lows. And a lot of times what seems like a lack of focus is sometimes life happens, and I wasn't afforded a place to make arm wrestling a priority. And focus, I'd say that I was obsessed about this probably since I was a kid. And people think that lack of training means you're not focused because they say no excuse. But sometimes there really are. There really are reasons. But yeah, I've had times when I've been arm wrestling minded 24/7. It doesn't mean that I'm in a gym 24/7 or even go to a practice for 6 months. So things happen. I had a baby when I was living out in Vegas. I'd say when I noticed some of the spikes in my career is when I've been able to dive deep in those points for, months at a time. So when I lived in Las Vegas, luckily, I had nothing going on out there. I was out there. I was broke. I got blacklisted from working at the casinos. And, next thing you know, I'm at a gas station in the ghetto. And my only outlet there was a great team of arm wrestlers, which were Lenny Lockhart, Ryan Constantino, and Eric
Spotto was out there, yeah.
Yeah, and a couple other guys.
Yeah. Trained with them out there a few times. Good times. Really good times.
Yeah, it was awesome. So when I trained with those guys, I went to a place where, now I'm training 2 days a week with people who are just as hungry and they're just as like-minded, and you're keeping involved in the sport and going to the gym. And in that 8-month span, I got really, really, really strong. And I'd say I hit a stride there for a period of time. I lived with Tim Bresnan for a bit, and that was a good spot. And then, if you want me to be 100% honest, a big part of why I've been so, people could say I created my own pitfalls. For lack of a better way of putting it, I had some legal troubles, and I didn't have a license for a long time. I didn't have a license for 15 years. I had some legal issues, and I couldn't get around to practices or gyms for up until 4 years ago, 3 years ago. When you start hearing me popping up at places is really when the dust settled on me. I was a wild early 20-something, and I basically burnt the town down, and it caught up with me and bit me. And then here I was 10, 12 years later, and I was glued to my own basement. If I couldn't get people to come cater to me, I couldn't travel. I couldn't train. And people are like, oh, you're lazy. I'm like, the people I train with are an hour away. For a kid who's on a bike or walking, that might as well be Jamaica. You know what I mean? It might as well be Africa. You know what I mean? So, you hear people say, oh, no excuses. Well, walk
that's not,
man's shoes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What was I going to do? Have my pregnant girlfriend at the time, Heather, oh, can you bring me to practice, wait around for 2 hours, always sweat and grunt, and then drive me home? So it's like a 4-hour commitment for her. She didn't even know I was an arm wrestler the first 2-3 years we were together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
she didn't even know I arm wrestled for the first 2 years. We had 2 kids by the time she even knew I arm wrestled. I put it on the back burner because I got so defeated that I couldn't pursue it the way I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. So you would say at that time that the sport was obsessing your mind, not necessarily you were able to carry that out on the table or in
through action. Yeah. It's like, walking around as a, I don't know, a closet perv or something, but you just never act on anything. Like, these things are in your mind. They're obsessing me. And it was a bad obsession at times because it was something I couldn't necessarily act on. I didn't have the space or the finances to build a home gym, and I didn't have the means to get back and forth to a gym. And I didn't want to be the one to make somebody else be somebody else's problem or dependent. So I just ate it. You know what I mean? I was like, I'm just going to be here it's like doing prison time. Yeah. So only until the last couple of years when the dust started settling am I able to get back into it. And then you hit that time and space where you're like, is it too little, too late?
So what would you say in those early days? For a start, in those early days, who were your target men? Who were the men that you were focused on, aware of, conscious of?
Anybody that was deemed high level that I heard about or saw a lot. So Chad Silvers, Mike Solaris, especially me being from New England. Yep. Mike Solaris, I believe at that time, was he had won a lot of tournaments, and if he didn't, it was because John Brzezinski was there. But if, like the GNC, some of those big events that I watched and researched, like Mike was the guy that was coming in second if Brzezinski was in the house. Yeah. And so I'd say Mike Solaris being a New England guy, James Smith was a top dog. When I started to rise, Todd Hutchins himself took a hiatus for a couple of years, so I wasn't really in the hunt for him. But then you had like Chad Silvers. He had beat me in a tournament in 2006, maybe. Mm-hmm. I felt that I was more in it, but there were some things that happened that weren't called, high pins. He didn't hold the pin leg, weird stuff. But those are the guys that, I was pretty much able to get over on everyone else. But there was that, what I saw, that next, there's the elites of the North America, and then there's that next step, the guys who, no matter how you mix them up, they're always in the top. At the time, I would say those were the guys. Mike, I never went against for years. Like, we kind of bebopped around each other. And then, James Smith, Yeah. It was mainly James Smith gave me nightmares for years.
What was it about James that you were concerned about?
I only pulled him for about 1 to 1.5 years, and I think he dipped off, and we didn't ever meet up again.
Mm.
James was, when you think of the nature as you're only posting, that's it. You're just going straight up and hard this way. If you meet, and it worked for me with 99% of guys, but if you meet somebody who's proficient enough, like we say about Engen, to keep you flat from getting out and away from them, you then leave your hand, and then you end up palm up. And then you get a guy who's kind of like here on you and you're palm up away from your arm like this. It's a very vulnerable position. And he made me rethink my game as much as anybody, because I was like, when the match would stop, I'd be so separated and away from my arm. He actually had that very like John Brzenk, Ron Bath type style that if you did get caught, like he would kind of turn you palm up, and my move was all or nothing at those days.
Mm-hmm.
But I could do it to everybody but him. No matter how you mixed up the bracket, it'd be R.V.J in the finals coming up the B side, because he put me in the B side, and then goddamn James Smith in the A side. And he gave me nightmares. And then the one tournament he wasn't at the Nationals, I won. But for a year and a half, my first year and a half, he terrorized me. And then he kind of dipped off. I don't know if he had a family or injury or what happened. And I saw him at some of the W.A.L events when they were doing the tournaments in Vegas. I'm like 16. And I was just hoping to pull him just so I could, lay it to rest for my own thing. But, I mean, that was an incredible class with incredible people, and he didn't make his way into us pulling.
Mm. Yeah, James was a rock when he was at his peak. There's been others like that did well.
Evolve, people evolve. You come back, and it's a different sport.
Yeah.
Some people can't take a long layoff. It's like you get ring rust in this game. Taking a long layoff, even how people pull is different. The way people arm wrestle predominantly 15 years ago might be a little bit different than now.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And there's guys that have done it successfully. People like Touye, Craig's been away, come back, and he's rock solid. And others
for about 5 years. Todd Hutchins took about 5 years off, I think, 4 or 5. Chad Silver's dipped off for a little bit. I dipped off for a little bit, but I dabbled. I go in tournaments, but I literally disappeared for probably about 3 years.
Let me ask you another one, mate. Did you have any, and this may be due to the restrictions that you were talking about a moment ago, but was there ever concern about international travel at that time? Was that the reason you didn't ever want to pop up at a Worlds or pop up at a big international event? What were the restrictions there? Any of those sort of, you started the sport in the sort of golden year of the Zloty Tour with the pulling John.
Mm.
What?
Yeah, 100%. To be honest, I did a lot of years of just scratching by. Trying to hustle, trying to keep my head above water, and the idea of ponying up a plane ticket. Literally for me, I had enough to get by, but I was my own train wreck. I was my own problem. Could I have saved for it and done things different? But I didn't live past today.
Yep.
I didn't save. I'd be the person that would have fun all month, and then the last day when rent's due, I'd be like, oh God, like I gotta scrounge up this money. I didn't have any dependents either. I was only drowning myself.
Mm-hmm.
Things changed for me a lot once I had a kid. It opened my eyes to somebody comes before me, and that kind of put me on a straight and narrow a little bit. But did I want to go? Of course. Would I like to have gone to Zloty? Of course. I just didn't want to do it as much as looking 6 months down the road to plan it, as opposed to what I want to do today. And so I was short-sighted. I suffered from very, I wanted, but I was like those people on my 600-pound life who they all want to be skinny, but they don't want to stop eating 5 pizzas a day. So how bad do you really want it if you're not going to apply it? There was never a day in the last 15 years I didn't think about arm wrestling. Just, it wasn't necessarily number one. It was probably a close number 2, but through my actions, it wasn't number 1 enough for me to make selfless acts. Not until maybe recently. Maybe the last year or 2.
I'd even question that, mate. Whenever I speak to you, you're very, very clear on your priorities. And I respect you massively for that. You're obviously very clear on that your family comes first. that your kids come first, Heather comes first, and so on. And then after that, you'll fit in arm wrestling wherever you can. And I think a lot of people miss that in you. I think you obviously there's a misperception that you're this very confident, brash, outspoken individual, and that you're massively committed to it. Yeah, you have some success, but people don't necessarily give you the credit that you perhaps warrant. And I think there's the fact that you haven't been seen a great deal internationally, apart from the people that have had the close proximity to you, like myself, like others that have been over and know a lot about you and know what your capabilities are. You don't get that respect as a result of that. But when we were talking recently on one of the W.A.L This Week podcasts, I remember a comment that you made which struck a chord with me and definitely with a lot of people that listen to that show. And one of the things you said when we were speaking about your mate Ryan Bowen, and you were questioned whether you thought, I think Ryan said, look, you really think you'll run over me? And you sort of said, yeah, I don't discredit or disbelieve what you're telling me about your experience. And he said, and you said, you've probably had more experience in arm wrestling than I have, because you're sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, and you're on a fast track. You've got this access to Devon Larratt, John Brasing, Travis Pageant, and the list goes on, Todd Hutchins, and so on and so on and so on. And I think that was a bit of a level that even Ryan, I think, was like, what? He sort of didn't expect that to come out of your mouth. And I thought it was a very, I don't think there was any agenda in that. I think you were just speaking, as you so often do, completely, there it is. That's it. That's how I feel. And it may well be true, because Ryan is effectively a professional arm wrestler.
Right.
That is what he does. You know, with a guy in the UK called Paul Maiden, who is able to, because of what he does for a job, is able to commit an enormous amount of time to the sport of arm wrestling. Good on the lad. That's great. You know, I wish everybody like that all the success in the world. And Paul's obsessive about arm wrestling. He loves it. Ryan loves the sport. Is spending each and every waking moment on it. Not necessarily the case with yourself. You know, you just don't do that. Do you ever get to a situation where you start to consider how good you could be?
Every day it bothers me. It bothers me. Even I'm not going to go down the drug hole, because I think that's a dead horse. But I've seen what it's done for people, and I wonder where I could be if I did it. Whether people believe I have or haven't, I've had people tell me to my face they think I'm lying, and that's okay. I'm not going to go down that hole, but I do see what it can do for people. I've seen guys who can't bench press 300 for one rep, and in 2 months deep on whatever it is they're doing, they're repping 350. I mean, that's a big difference. 50 pounds for a rep over your backs. And I'm sure that's not unheard of. I'm sure people have even bigger extremes.
Yeah.
So on that note, that goes hand in hand with, I wonder with, you know, even beyond that, yeah, if somebody like an investor came down and said, you know, I love the league, I want to take your top athletes, and I want to make this now where we'll get a real spectacle. We're going to make everybody, this is what they do. Like, you know, when I watch the thing on Kazakhstan, R.V.J, he's got arm wrestling schools. Like, he makes his living arm wrestling. His culture 100% supports that. He's an icon. I mean, he's got 1,200 kids in his school, and that's whenever they did that interview. It might be more than that now. If I was ever immersed in a way where I didn't have to be in the grind and in the hustle and work and get up early and go do what I do, would I be different? If my job was to be stronger and better, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
When I get up at 5 in the morning and I get home at 5 at night, and then my kids are at me to like do homework or let's play games or let's do something. Some days I'm like, well, give me an hour and I'll dip to the gym. But if you really want to know the truth, I don't work out 4 days a month. You know, what my workouts will be, I'll watch a video on YouTube and I'll be like, oh, you know, some curl challenge or wrist curl. And I'll go down there and try to wax a set of something to see if I can do it. And I'll do sporadic sets when I'm changing my clothes or I'm in my basement fixing something. And I'll just grab something because the time is spread so thin. I'm not in a place, I'm not a monetary driven person, which is why I've pissed through so much money in my life. But if I was in a position where I didn't have to work, it then could become, it would free up all that time for me to make this a focus. Right now, this for me is a hobby that I just happen to be very good at. I can't make it in my heart. It's more than me. It's 100% passion. It's 100% something that defines a lot about me, but I can't give it the time because it doesn't give back enough.
No,
it doesn't give me enough to put other things on the back burner. I can't put work on the back burner. I can't put my kids on the back burner. But if I could free up all that time where I was making a decent wage, or, somebody like R.V.J or the other guys making a living, yeah, I'd be leveled up 2-3 levels higher for sure. People don't want to know that I don't even work out. Well, I see some people's programming, and what they do in a random week is more than I'll get out of a whole season.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt about that, mate. And, it's funny you make that point, because we started to in the presence of greatness. It's a show we do. If you haven't caught it, check it out on it. We do a show called In the Presence, where I've got John Brzenk on there, Engin's on there, Devon comes on there. The amount of questions we get about John Brzenk's training. How does John Brzenk train? How did John Brzenk train? I was around John for a lot of his career, and John was by no means, has never been the most focused guy on training, on supplemented training. What John did was arm wrestle and expose himself to arm wrestling everywhere and anywhere against all styles, had a readiness to take on all styles, had a proficiency in all styles, and a magnificent, in fact, mental attitude to the sport, an understanding of the sport. He is a natural arm wrestler. And I believe that you are also. And I don't believe there's too many men that can say that to that level. It's almost like they've found their calling, that they definitely were made to do that by design or otherwise. Yeah. And that's what's fascinating. Somebody said to me the other day on one of the shows as well, do you think arm wrestling would change a great deal if a lot of money came into the sport? And my answer to that was absolutely, yeah. An enormous amount, for a myriad of reasons. But I think you'd find that you'd see, if it was really worthwhile in that respect, you'd see an influx of the super gifted. Over time, more would come to the sport, and they would stick with the sport. And over a 5 to 10 year period, those people would become a presence, a real presence, and they'd be more of the super gifted guys, in my opinion, more of them. So that could thin the field down. And the next question was, who do you think from the current crop would still be in there? And you're one of those guys that I mentioned. And I think there are a few others, But if you're talking about, you said you don't want to go down the drug hole, and I get that entirely. But if it was clean, if you could achieve that, and it comes down to genetic potential, I think you're definitely in the upper echelon in that respect, as was John, as are some others. Would you agree with that statement? Do you always feel like you were more naturally gifted? Because it's something that gets thrown your way a lot, and I wanted to know how you feel about that.
I don't usually get to, there's not much I don't like to say, but at the risk of sounding like, super full of myself, because people think I come across that way. And honestly, it's anything but. I'm not a person that takes compliments well. I'm not a person, I get weird if somebody says something like complimentary and nice. I don't know if it's kind of something in me or the way. So when people say like, oh, he's got a big head, he thinks you don't even know what goes on inside my head. But in reality, if I was to break myself into pieces and look at my life from a kid till now, things that kind of always came easy for me that were harder for other people athletically, just things that people said couldn't be done and I've done. Yeah, I do. I do think that in the strength world and in a lot of aspects of athleticism, things came easier for me. And I've walked this earth and I've traveled and I've lived in a lot of places, and I can't really recall when I've bumped into somebody like me or met somebody like me. And that's not saying that I'm out there or that I've been hyper aware of it, but once again, the strength world, you do, meet people and you're a little more aware of somebody's physicality and how they're made up. And, Yeah, and I mean, there's been other sports that I've had offers to go very far in, and you know, when I was a kid and I boxed, I had an opportunity to be a full-time boxer. I had an investor that was going to come down and told me to quit my work. They had a top trainer. They wanted me to go the whole 9 yards and be a great white hope. I was in my 20s. I was like, yeah, opportunity to be there forever. Hit me up in 6 months. And next thing you know, you're in your 30s. And for boxing, that's you might as well be 1,000 years old. But that's kind of it. Things just seem to come easier. Like those opportunities were there. So because they were there, I thought they'd be there forever. But, you know, to answer your question in a very roundabout way, I don't want to come off as big-headed and full of myself. But if I'm being honest, do I think I'm more physically gifted in aspects? Yeah, I do. Because of things that I've done that people have had to program for. I used to get all kinds of on the grip board. I put a video up one time of doing one-arm pull-ups when I had like a 25-pound dumbbell in my hand. People are like, what was your programming for that? What was your training for that? Did you do negatives? Like, did you use a rubber band? And I'm like, I don't even know what any, like, I'm going to try to put this as nice as I can. I didn't train for it. I just literally one day grabbed the bar and could do one-arm pull-ups. I didn't try to. I was curious about it. I just grabbed it and was like, I could just pull myself up. And because I could pull myself up, I inevitably, like, every now and then would do a set of them. But people were telling me, like, rock climbers were like, well, what was your deload? They were saying all these terms I didn't know. And I'm like, I sound like an asshole. Like, I don't want to share secrets. But the reality is, I just did. Like picking up the inch dumbbell. I went to a grip tournament. My first grip tournament, the inch dumbbell was a mythical thing that nobody could pick up. And Bill Casimir could only get it off the ground that much. And I was 190 pounds. And I walked in. I was like, oh, there's that thing I read about. I picked it up, held it there, did it both hands. And Jed Johnson's a grip guy now. He was like, who the fuck is this guy that just rolled up here? I mean, and I didn't think anything of it because, like I said, I was exposed to strong men, and I wasn't doing things to show off or brag. I just could.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this episode and this further insight in episode 3 on Rob Vigeant Jr. We're going to wrap it up there for this one, but we'll be back with more from Rob very, very soon. Remember, if you like what we do, please like, subscribe, share, tell everybody about it, guys. And tune in for the next one, number 4 with Rob coming soon. Rob, thanks for joining us, brother. Yeah, everybody out there, take it easy, peeps.
No worries.